Hello, in this video, I'll go through DesignVAT's budget template. Now on the screen, I've opened up the template and it's powered with Microsoft Excel. So you need to have Excel, preferably a version from 2013, installed on your computer. Now once you open up the template, you arrive at the dashboard, and this holds 3 thumbnails to navigate to the 3 major sections of the template. We have the expense category section. This is where you define your categories that make up the budget. We have the estimated budget section where you create your yearly budget. And lastly, we have the report section where you can view multiple reports. Now in this video, I'm going to go through all the sections, starting with the first, which is the expense category. To open up a particular section, you simply click. So clicking takes us to that section of the template. So now we're in the expense category section of the template. Now this is where you create your categories that define your budget. You notice I've already added data to this section. Before I come to that, first of all, let me go through the layout. In the upper left-hand corner, we have the section title, and this tells the user at any point in time the section you're currently on. So notice it says expense categories, so you know this is where you define all your categories. To the right of this, we have a button labeled Delete Row. This is used to delete existing expense categories. So for instance, if you want to delete any of the categories listed here, you make use of this button. Above this, in the upper right-hand corner, we have our navigation pane, and this has several labels. Each label is a button to navigate to a particular section of the template. So for instance, the dashboard label, if I click on this, is going to take us back to the dashboard where we initially started. Below the delete button here, we have our data table, and this is where all expense categories will be listed. You notice the data table is made up of 4 columns. The first 3, that's the category, level, and subcategory, are data entry fields, values to be supplied by the user. And the 4th column is a formula generated field, which is made up of the first, that's contents in the first column, plus contents in the second column. Now you notice, as I said earlier on, that I've already populated this with data. So all categories and subcategories from the sample workbook you sent, I've imported them here. So for instance, you notice we have capital expenditure, project activities, and so on. So in the first column, the user enters the category name. So you enter the name of the category in the first column. In the second column, this is where you indicate the level. Recall you mentioned that you wanted to track your spending per level. So federal government spending, on a state level, and on a local government level. So this enables you to do that. So for every expense category you enter, the template will automatically insert 3 rows, which I'm going to demonstrate shortly. The first for federal, second for state, and third for local government. Now the third column is where you specify the subcategories. So a particular expense category can have multiple subcategories. There's really no limits. For instance, you notice that the capital expenditure has 2 subcategories. We have the equipment and supplies furniture. However, the project activities has more than 2. It has training, IEC, mass drug administration, and so on. So there's no limit to the number of subcategories that a particular category can have. So once you specify the category, the template inserts 3 rows, 1 for federal, state, local government. Then you specify the subcategories. And lastly, we have the formula field. Now this is a unique identifier. So later on, when you're indicating amounts to each category, it enables you specify amounts for federal, for state, and for local government, all within the same category, which is capital expenditure. So now let me demonstrate how you add new categories. So first of all, you scroll to the extreme bottom, that's to the last row. Now once you get to the last row, which is here, the last row here is our monitoring, evaluation, and lesson learning. So to add a new category, simply double click on the cell beneath the last row. So I double click here, and then you type the new category name. So let's assume this category is stationaries. Once I'm done typing the category name, I make use of the tab key on my keyboard to move to the next field where I enter the level. Now once you enter tab, or you press tab, the template will automatically insert 3 rows for you. So it will automatically insert the federal row, the state row, and the local government row. It will equally highlight the row different from the preceding value so they can easily at a glance identify the groups. So these are the 3 groups under stationaries, the 3 groups under M&E, the 3 groups under administration cost, and so on. So it's going to alternate the coloring, white, gray, white, gray. And it's going to insert 3 for the 3 levels of spending and automatically generate the IDs for the 3 levels. So once you enter the category name, Excel will do that for you automatically. The next thing you need to do is to enter subcategories if applicable. So for instance, for M&E, there are no subcategories. There's only the category name, so the subcategory is blank. However, for staff costs, we have subcategories like recruitments, program staff salaries, and so on. So the choice is really yours if they're subcategories or not. But for this example, let's assume that we have two subcategories. We have pens and we have books under the category of stationaries. So all I need to do is to double click on the field under budget subcategory and type in the first, which is pens. Once I'm done, I simply click on enter and I repeat it for state and local governments. Now, to save me from typing every time, so typing PENS again, a quick way in Excel to repeat the values above is to press your control key together with your apostrophe key. So the apostrophe key usually is beside the enter key. So once you press control and apostrophe, it will automatically duplicate the values above. So notice pens. If I press that again, control apostrophe, it will duplicate it for me, so I don't have to type. So that's just a quick way of repeating or duplicating the values above in the cell, in the active cell. So now I've successfully added my first category, stationaries, and my first subcategory. Now to add another subcategory for stationaries, I just repeat the process. I double click on the cell below the last cell, and then I type stationery. So instead of typing, I can use the trick I just mentioned. That's a shortcut, control apostrophe. It will automatically repeat the values above, stationaries. Once I click enter, Excel will automatically insert 3 rows, one for federal, one for state, and one for local governments. All I need to do now is to enter the subcategory books, Control-hyphen to repeat it, Control-hyphen to repeat it. So now I've successfully added one category with 2 subcategories. Okay, so that's how you add categories. Very easy. You double click, you type, you press enter. Excel will automatically insert 3 rows. Then you go ahead and enter optional subcategories. Now, to delete a particular expense category, it's also very easy. You make use of the delete row button. Now, you notice that every value you supply is represented by a row on the table. So we have this row, we have this row, and so on. And each row is made up of cells. So for instance, for the last row, we have our budget category cell, level cell, subcategory cell, and so on. So if you want to delete any row, all you need to do is to click on any cell in that row. So for instance, if I click on the category cell, click on delete, I get a confirmation message. If I click on yes, it's going to go ahead and delete the last row. I can repeat that again a second time. I simply click on the category cell. You notice a border around the cell. Click on delete, click on yes, and it's going to delete that row. So I can repeat that process to delete all categories that I want to delete. So that's how you add new categories and you delete existing categories. And the template will automatically insert 3 rows and create the ID, which you're going to use in the next section when you're creating your budget. So that's the summary of the first section. Now we move ahead to the create budget section where we automatically create our yearly budget. So clicking on the label takes us to that section of the template. So now we're in the yearly estimated budget section. Now this is where you create your budgets on a yearly basis. Notice it has the same layout or a similar layout. In the upper left-hand corner, we have the section title. To the right of this, we have 2 buttons. To add a new budget entry, to delete an existing one. Above this, we have our navigation pane, and below we have our table where all budget line items will be listed. Now to add a new budget line item, you simply click on the add button at the top and this pops up a form. Now this form just provides a simpler way to add data to this table here. So you notice that the column headers are equally repeated on the row as labels, on the form, as labels. The user is expected to supply values to the white portion of the form. Now the first attribute is the date. By default, Excel is going to enter today's date. Now, this is a yearly budget, so the only attribute of the dates that's important is the year. So the template is going to disregard the day you enter and the month you enter. So these fields here are not going to be used by the template, only the year. So whatever category I select here, the template is going to add that to my 2019 budget. If I change this to 2020, I'm telling the template that this expense is my proposed spending for 2020. So the template is going to disregard the day you enter and the month. So these values are not used. So they can be anything pretty much. I'm going to change this back to 2019. Next, I indicate the number of rows. Now to explain what this does, first of all, let me add the expense category and expense subcategory. Now the expense category is self-explanatory. This is a drop-down list and it's going to list all expense categories from our category section. So remember that combined column. So the value there is what we have displayed here. So now you can indicate your spending for federal, state, local government across all categories. Now, if you select or when you select the category, once you move to the next field using the tab key on your keyboard, the template will automatically list only subcategories related to the category you specified. So we specified capital expenditure. So we have only 2, which is equipment and supplies. If I change this to stationaries, which is the new category we just added, notice it's already here. Once I move to the next field, you notice it's going to display my pens and my books. So this is the dynamic drop-down list. The values that are displayed here depend on your selection in the category field. I'm going to change this back to capital expenditure, the first entry for the federal. Next, I'm going to select equipments. So what I'm telling Excel is that I want to create a budget line item. So what I plan to spend on equipment year 2019, federal level capital expenditure. Now, the number of rows is where I tell Excel the number of equipment I plan to buy. Now, this is very useful because the rows you enter or the number you enter determines the number of rows Excel is going to insert for you. So if I plan to buy 3 equipment, for instance, computers, printers, laptops, I go ahead and enter 3. Once I click enter, Excel will automatically insert 3 rows. And on each row, it will automatically repeat the date for me, so I don't have to type, the category for me, the equipment for me, and then the expense detail. So it will automatically repeat the 3 first attributes for me, so I don't have to type. All I need to do now is to specify the expense detail, the units, quantity, the date, the unit cost, and so on. So these columns were extracted from the sample workbook you sent. Formulas have been added to automatically calculate the total cost and the dollar amount for you. Okay? So that's how you add line items in your budget. So we've told Excel that we want to add 3 equipments. So what I need to do now is under expense detail, type the name of the first equipment, which would be a laptop computer. Once I'm done typing, I make use of my tab key to move to the next field where I indicate the quantity. So how many laptops am I planning to buy in 2019 at the federal level? So let's assume I'm planning to buy 10. So I simply type in 10 there and I move to the next field. Now for equipment, the days and trip column is optional. For most equipment and physical purchases, most at times you just need to specify only the quantity and the unit cost. The template will multiply the 2 together to give us the total cost. So if each laptop costs 100,000, you notice that once I click enter, the template will calculate the total, multiplying the 2 together. So the days and trips is optional. But if for any reason you want to indicate that, so let's assume that this is going to be the number of states you're going to buy it for. So you're buying 10 units per state. You want to buy it in 5 states, so you simply enter 5 there. This is the cost of 1. The template will multiply the 3 together. So if this is empty, it's going to multiply only the units and the quantity. However, if you indicate a value here, it's going to multiply all 3 together to give you the total cost, which in this case would be 10 times 5 times 100, which gives us 5 million. Okay, so this is a dynamic formula depending on the number of attributes that you specify. Next, you enter the dollar rate. So in the sample document you sent, we noticed that you were trying to convert each of your line items or each spending to dollars. So we've created a provision for that here. So here you indicate the average dollar rates for year 2019. So let's assume you plan $300 or 300 Naira. So that's $1 equals 300 Naira. Once you enter 300, the template will automatically calculate the dollar amount. So it's going to do 5 million divided by 300 to give you this. So it will do that for you automatically. Okay, so those are the 2 formula generated fields. The total costs, which is made up of multiplying the 3 columns to the left, and the dollar amount, which is made up of dividing the total cost by the dollar rate. Lastly, we have the notes and remarks. This is an optional field. So here I can just go ahead and type, random values. So this is just where you add any additional note or remark pertaining to this spending. Now, another functionality that has been added to the template is the template will automatically resize the row based on the number of text or the quantity of text that you supply. So here, for example, I'm just going to repeat this 3 times. So random values, I'm going to paste that again, paste that again, paste that again. So this is 4 rows. And once I click enter, you notice that the template will automatically expand this row so as to be able to display the entire content. So you notice the row is wider now. So functionality has been added to automatically expand or reduce the row size depending on the number of text that you specify in the notes column and also in the expense detail column. So you notice now it has automatically expanded it. In the same way, if I delete all of this, so I'm just going to quickly demonstrate that. If I delete all of this, so that's only just 1 row, you notice it will automatically reduce it back to the default size, just like the other 2 rows. Okay, so it's automatically expanded for you and reduce it for you based on the volume of text you supply to those 2 columns. Okay, now you notice I did something now. When you're typing Excel by default, it's keeps typing on the same line. Now, once you reach the end of the size of the cell, it goes to the next line. But sometimes you might want to force the data to the next row. So if I want to force all of this to the next row, all I need to do is to press the Alt and Enter key on my keyboard together. Once I do, Excel will automatically shift it to the next row. Now, this is useful because when I noticed in your budget, sometimes you might need to write things on multiple rows. So if you want to force it, if I want to force this to move to the next row, all I need to do is to press the Alt and the Enter key together, and it's going to force it to the 3rd row. Once I click Enter now, it's going to expand it to display the 3 rows, or the 3 lines, 1, 2, 3. Okay? The same way, if I want it to be only 1 line, I can delete the 2 lines, press Enter, and it's going to reduce it to display only 1 line. So I hope that better explains that functionality. So now I'm going to go ahead and add the second equipment. So this time around, this is going to be a printer. Let's assume that we're buying 5 printers. This time around, we're buying it for only 1 branch or for only 1 state. So I'm going to leave the days blank. And each one, let's assume it goes for 55,000. So once I click Enter, it's going to multiply the 2 together to give us the total cost. Once I enter the dollar rate, it's going to divide that to give me the dollar amount. And I can add any optional notes, but I'm going to leave that blank. I'm going to add the 3rd equipment. I'm just repeating the process. This is going to be a scanner. Let's assume we're buying 2 scanners. So I go ahead and type 2. Now 22, only 2. I'm going to delete the second 2. And let's assume we're actually buying it for 3 states. So I'm going to type in 3 there. And the cost per each is 50,000. So the template is going to multiply the 3 attributes together to give us the total. Once I enter the dollar rates, I divide the 2 together. It's going to tell me the values in dollars, which is $1,000 actually, on the dot. So that's how the section works. This is how you create budget spending. Very user friendly. You simply click on the button at the top, pops up the form. You indicate the year. The other 2 fields are optional, but you need to, by default, Excel is going to enter the full dates. This is what is very important, the year that you enter. Next, you indicate number of rows. So next we're going to add staff salaries. So let's put 2 staff. So under, I'm going to look for staff, also for federal. This is going to be my program staff. So you notice it's going to display only subcategories relevant to staff costs. Once I select program staff salaries, what I'm telling the template is that in year 2019, I'm going to pay 2 staff under the federal level, and it's going to be this category and this subcategory. So once I click Enter, Excel is going to insert 2 rows. It's going to affix the date, the category, and the subcategory for me. All I need to do now is to enter the details. So for instance, this can be my program officer. So let's assume that I have 13 program officers. And for labor, most of the time you're going to use the days. So let's assume they're paid per diem, or they're going for 10 days. So this is going to be 10. And the per diem amounts can be, let's say, 40,000. So the template is going to multiply the 3 together. So 40 times 10 times 13. I'm going to use $300 rate, so the template will automatically calculate the dollar amount. I'm going to repeat that. My next staff is going to be my M&E officer. I'm equally going to have 10 M&E officers. We're going together, so it's also going to be for 10 days. And each one gets a per diem of only 10,000. The template is going to multiply the 3 together to tell me the total estimated spending for this particular expense. Once I enter the dollar amount, it's going to delete it, and then it's going to divide it, and give me the dollar equivalent. Okay, so that's how you add line items. Now, the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add for another year, for 2020. Now, the reason why I'm adding for 2020 is so that when I'm generating my report, there's a compare report that enables you to compare across multiple years. So all I need to change here for 2020 is only the year. As I said, the template doesn't make use of the day or the month. It makes use of only the year. So 2020, 2 rows. And this is going to also be staff salary. So I'm going to do this for also federal. And I'm equally going to select program staff, click enter. I'm going to do this very fast so as to shorten the length of the video. So the first is going to be my project driver. And we have 5 and we need them only for 5 days. And we're going to pay each one of them only 5,000 per day. Template multiplies the total, and in 2020 we're going to use 320. So we assume that the dollar is going to further depreciate, or the dollar is going to appreciate, the naira is going to depreciate. And next is going to be my office cleaner. And let's assume that we have 2 cleaners. We're equally going to use them for 5 days, and their per diem is only 2,000 naira. And I'm going to use the same dollar rate, which will be 320. The template will calculate the dollar equivalent, which is a bit over 62. Okay, and the last thing I'm going to add now is my recruitments. So let me just, the cost for recruiting the staff. This is also going to be for year 2020. So it's still going to be staff. Everything is going to be federal, just for demonstration purposes. But this time around is going to be my recruitment costs. Once I click enter, it's going to insert 2 rows. I fix the date, category, and subcategories. First, we're going to have advertising. I'm just going to call this adverts. And let's assume that this is going to be only 1. And let's assume it cost us 80,000 for advertising. So quantity is 1. Unit cost is 80, which gives us total of 80. Dollar rate is 320. And that gives us the dollar equivalent, which is 250. The next is going to be interview panel, if I can spell that correctly. And let's assume that this is going to cost us 160. So the quantity is equally going to be 1. But this time around, the unit cost is going to be 160. Template is going to calculate the total for me. I'm going to enter the dollar, which is 320, and the equivalent in dollar is $500. Okay, so now I've successfully added proposed budgets for the year 2019 and year 2020. For 2019, we have 2 line items. We have equipment and we have program staff salaries. For 2020, we have 2 line items also. We have salaries and we have recruitment cost. So that's how this section works. Very user-friendly. You simply make use of this button and supply values. So we've covered the categories and the create budget. Next, we move to our first report, which is our budget report. Now, what this report does is later on, this is a multi-year template. It supports up to 10 years. When you have spending across multiple years, for instance here, it's hard for you to know the total amount you spent on equipment in 2019 because it doesn't show that information here. So I have no way of knowing what's the total I spent in 2020 for recruitment. Doesn't show me that here. So you get that information from the budget report. Once you click on it, it will automatically refresh. There we go. And at the top here, you have the ability to filter per year. So right now, by default, it says 2019. I can change that. So once you click on the arrow to the right of the year, you have your various options. Now, if I select all, what I'm telling the template is that I want to combine the spending across all the years. So I want you to tell me the total amount I spent on equipment in 2019 and 2020. It's going to sum everything up together to give me the grand total. So the data that is being displayed here is data for 2019 and 2020. However, if I select a single year, for instance, only 2019, it's going to show me only spending or only proposed spending for 2019. So notice it will automatically filter the data and show me only for 2019. So now let's go through the sections. So at the top here, we have our column headers. So you notice we have the budget category, unit, days, unit cost, total cost, and the dollar amount. Now the template has been designed in such a way that it's grouped in sections. So first of all, we have the category section, which is highlighted in a bit of light gray shade. So this is the first category here, capital expenditure federal. This is the second category here, staff cost federal. So you notice they have the same highlights. For every category below it, we now have subcategories. So under capital expenditure, we have, for instance, equipment. So you notice that's the first subcategory, equipment. And under equipment, we now have the details, which is the list of equipment that we spent or that we bought. So you notice how it's outlined. It makes it easier for you to better understand your data. So from here, I can be able to know that the total amount I spent in equipment, notice we have our subtotal column. We have our subtotal row. So the total amount I spent on equipment here tells me is a bit over 5 million. And this is the dollar equivalent. So the data is there for me. So I can know that in 2019, this is what I spent on equipment. And the overall total for capital expenditure that's across all subcategories is equally listed in a light shade of green. So the category subtotal is in a light shade of green, and the subcategory subtotal is in a light shade of blue. If I scroll to the bottom, we have the same under staff costs. This is the staff cost. Under this, we have a subcategory of program staff salaries. Under this, we have 2 details, the program officer and the M&E. This is the respective line item This is the respective line item, and this is the subtotal for this subcategory. So the program staff total for the year 2019. Below that, we have the staff cost total for 2019. So the template groups it neatly, and at the bottom we have our grand total, which is the sum of all spending for the year 2019. If I change this to 2020, we're going to see the same, but the data is going to change. So in 2020, we have only staff cost, I think. But let it load so we can be able to confirm that. So there we go. So 2020, we have only staff costs. We have staff cost federal. This is the only category, but under this, we have two subcategories. We have the program staff and the recruitment cost. So you notice the way it neatly groups it under each other so that you can easily look at it and understand the data, as opposed to what we had in the budget section where everything is clustered together. So here, notice data is clustered together. You cannot make sense of this information, but the budget report enables you make sense and better appreciate your data. So there we go. So for 2020, we have two subcategories. Program staff, here, this is the total we spent on program staff salaries. 145,000. This is the total we spent on recruitment, 240,000. Now the overall total, which is the sum of the two, what we spent on staff cost is 385,000. So you notice the light blue for subcategory total, light green for category total, and a darker shade of gray for the grand total at the bottom. Okay, and it does this for you on a yearly basis. Now we've equally set this to print on an A4 page. So if I go to my print preview, you notice the margins have been set to print properly on an A4 page. There we go. So you notice everything together. And also the headers will repeat on every page. So on every page, you see the budget category, units, days, and so on. So that's the first report. This just enables you to generate your yearly budget summary, and it outlines it neatly per category. And under every category, you have the subcategory, then the expense detail. So subcategory, expense detail, subcategory total, category total, and then grand total. The next report is our budget summary. Now, the difference between the budget report and the budget summary is, in the budget report, it lists everything per level. So here we have the staff cost federal. If there's a staff cost local government, it's equally going to be listed here. So it breaks it up per level. So you can be able to know the total amount you spend staff cost federal, staff cost state, staff cost local government, and so on. But the summary sums it all up together. So it's going to list only staff cost once, which is going to sum up the state, the federal, and the total, and the local government together. So if I click budget summary, it will automatically refresh that report. There we go. And you notice exactly what I said. Under capital expenditure, we have only capital expenditure. So here it doesn't regard whether it's federal, whether it's state, whether it's local government. It's going to sum everything together. So you know that in 2019 and 2020, this is the total you spent for capital expenditure across all levels. The same for staff cost across all levels. Okay, so that's why it's called summary, because it sums it all up together per category, regardless of if it's federal, state, or local government spending. And you can equally filter by year. So I can change this to 2020, for instance. It's going to show me my staff costs. And I can change to 2019. So later on, when you have other data, there are going to be more years listed here. Okay, you can see for multiple years. To do that, once you click on the filter, you simply check the select multiple items box. Okay, so that's how the summary works. This is going to list the categories, while the budget summary is going to list the categories per level. So you know what you spent on a federal level, state level, and local government level. So those are the first two reports. Now the last report is our comparison report, which is compare reports. And this just enables you to compare across multiple years. So once you click on it, it opens up. And all you need to do here is to enter the start year. So as we said earlier on, the template supports up to 10 years. So the start year you enter here, for instance, 2019, the template will automatically return 10 years, starting with 2019. So you notice 2019 up until, if I scroll to the right, 2028. So it's a 10-year period. If I change this to, 2025, and I click enter, it's going to start at 2025, then add 9 additional consecutive years to 2034. So the first step when using this report is to enter the start year, which in this case I'll enter 2019. Next, you simply click refresh. And once you click refresh, the template is going to list all categories, all subcategories, and the respective total amount you budgeted on a yearly basis. So once I click refresh, it's going to take a while to load, depending on the volume of data you have. The more categories and subcategories you have, the longer the report takes to refresh. Now the process is complete. I don't have many categories, so it didn't take so long. And you notice how it groups it neatly. So as I said, it's going to list all categories in your database. So if you have 20 categories, it's going to list 20 categories in this format with the 2 lines. So any cell with the light shade of gray and 2 lines, that's a category. So you notice we have capital expenditure, federal, state, local governments. If I scroll to the bottom, we have project activities, state, federal. We have local government, so on up until the last, which is the stationaries that I added. There we go. We have stationaries, stationaries, and stationaries. So it's going to list all categories with their respective subcategories. After doing that, it's going to now go to your create budget section and sum it all up to know the total amount you spent per category, per subcategory. So here now we can see that for equipment, this is the total amount we spent in 2019. For supplies, we did not spend anything. So we don't have so much data, so there are a lot of zeros. But if I go to recruitment, we should see also some values under staff cost. There we go. Under staff cost federal, we spent a total of a bit over 6 million in 2019. And in 2020, we spent a bit over 145, or exactly 145 in 2020, and 240 in 2020 before recruitment cost. So it's going to do that for you automatically for each category. And just to quickly do that demonstration, I'm going to quickly add capital expenditure federal for 2020 so you can compare the two together. So if I quickly go to create budget, I add a new category. I'm going to make this 2020. And I'm just going to add one row so that this is very fast. I'm just going to make it federal also. And it's also going to be equipments. Once I click enter, it's going to insert only one row for me below the last row. And this is just going to be projector. So let's assume that we're buying 2 projectors and each one goes for 65,000. The exchange rate, I'm going to leave it at 320. Okay, so now I've successfully added a capital expenditure federal for 2020. So if I go to my compare reports, and all I need to do now is I need to refresh it because I've updated the data. We should now see a value listed here under 2020. So notice it's 0, but when the process is complete, we should see a value there. There we go. So you notice what I just added, 130, which is the 2 projectors, 65 each. 65 times 2 is 130. So that's how this comparison report works. And later on, when you have data across the 10 years, you can be able to now compare. This is what I spent in 2019. This is what I plan to spend in 2020, and so on. Okay, so that's how the multi-year budget template works. So I've covered all the sections. So the first step is to add additional categories. I've already added some, you can append more. Second step is you create your budget. Here you indicate the category first, subcategory, and the number of items you want or number of rows you want Excel to insert for you. Once you do, template inserts the row. You enter the units, days, unit cost. The template will automatically calculate the total cost. You enter the dollar rate, the template will calculate the dollar amount. You can enter optional notes. Once you're done creating your budget, this is where you're going to spend the bulk of your time. Once you're done here, you can then now create your reports. This report just shows you the total per level, per category, grouping it neatly under each other so we can see the subtotal total and the category total, subcategory total, and category total. And the budget summary just tells you the total amount you spent per category, per subtotal, regardless of if it's on a federal, state, or local government level. And the compare reports enables you compare across multiple years. Thanks, and do take care.